the second segment. This is the link of the general conversations. I am here in conversation with Counsel Christopher Isaac Lubogo. You have so many accolades that you have won, one of which is Best Legal Researcher in Africa. As you know, counterfeits is the form of struggle for the government. Is this an area that you take an interest in researching on, or is it one that you are going to consider, seeing as counterfeits permeate every section of African society?
That's a very good question and very pertinent considering the subject that we're talking about. I have already captured a few things that have to do with counterfeit, especially in our book called Cyber Law, in terms of data protection rights and what you need to know in terms of protecting data and intellectual property, as it were. But on a broader perspective, in terms of fighting counterfeit, I think that's a novel area, and I'm extremely impressed. Rarely will you find people like you who are well accomplished in practice and even in other areas who actually lend their weight in terms of doing exploitative things like this. And this is what I've been telling my friends and young friends from Law Enforcement Center, that some of you struggle in terms of finding jobs and opportunities because you're failing to think outside the box. You have demonstrated by what you're doing now that I think these are novel areas. You're coming out groundbreaking areas and trying to help the nation to fight one of the biggest problems that actually affects the ordinary Africans. We are prey because of our poverty level and because of our ignorance level. Everything in Africa has been chosen as a landing slot. So many of the things in Africa are not even checked. You go down to the next pharmacy. In England or in Europe, you cannot even buy near Canada if they have not been prescribed by a medical personnel. Here, I just walk through a pharmacy and ask for Viagra, and they will give it to me instantly. How many times have you seen Viagra being put in other drugs and people tell you to go and drink that one? It will do the magic for you. These things have got health backfires on us without us knowing. They cause hypertension, they cause cancer. How many clothes do we find on the streets of Kampala where we get them branded and being brought from America or where? Simply because they've been dumped over, forgetting that some of these people have been got contagious diseases. And we even forget that sometimes people who are malicious. One time I saw a clip of these things that were using during COVID-19, what are these things called? The masks. Where these guys were sneezing in them, standing on their face, but we probably saw that and then throwing them to us in terms of that. Things like polio, even in America, was being used, was weaponized, being put there and sent to innocent Africans, black Africans, and even Indians to advocate for their dissemination. But that's another, argument in terms of that. But what you're saying is true. So I see a big problem in terms of counterfeit, and I think, a very important policy perhaps. Government should actually come up with policy. You're talking about counterfeit products, but don't even talk about the things that we use even in terms of building materials. The labels, the quantifications of whether or not these follow the standards of what UNPS for purposes of how many times do we see buildings collapsing on us? How many times do we see kids being born with limbs or perhaps inadequate body supplies in their bodies because their mothers were not fed enough, or because their mothers were given wrong medical attention in terms of
so in other words, it's prevalent.
It's prevalent.
As a researcher who was written on cyber law,
yes.
Here at the legal general, we understand that the cyberspace, the Internet of Things, the e-trade, the e-commerce is a major barrier, transmission line for counterfeits. What is your experience with e-trade as a tool for promoting trade, but also promoting trade in counterfeits?
One of the biggest hindrances in terms of e-commerce or digitalizations of sorts, if you want, is again the issue of counterfeit by way of piracy. It's incredible. I'll give an example. Netflix, for example, you probably know Netflix. I pay Netflix for about $11 per month. I know someone who can get you Netflix free of charge. Think about that. I know many DSTV, where you're actually paying a tune of about how many dollars, $5 or so. I know someone who can put on your phone, on your gadgets or Android free of charge. So every now and then we have counterfeits that are manifesting themselves in different ways. It appears that every time someone comes up with an invention, one of the biggest questions, by the way, perhaps one of the guys you need to interview is Professor, the one of the covidence. One, you remember?
Yes, yes.
One of the challenges is saying that how are you going to beat counterfeits? Because you come up with this covidence, and what are you going to do in terms of creating a standard for it? He said we will try to label our bottles and so that they have QR codes, so that when you put your phone on them, they reflect. But even in spite of that, there is still someone who is thinking over and above. Again, question of counterfeit, first of all, is a moral question. It's an ethical question. It's also a legal question in terms of the regulatory framework. So those are challenges that you and I have to sit down and harness. But it's also something that has to do with the system of governance, because of the root of corruption that tends to thrive and propel this ideology. You probably heard about the junk helicopters. You remember them? And what happened? How many billions of shillings did you west to Belarus and pay, and then come up with junk helicopters? So when you talk about issues of counterfeit, it's a very broad and wide scope. Even the fabrication of COVID, during the time of COVID, this is between me and you, I know I'm okay. A whole doctor came to me and said, you know, this is our time to make money. You know why? Because when you walk in the hospital, all they did was to do a swab. When they do a swab, they do a viral swab. A viral swab will not specifically get you the COVID. Because if you want the COVID, then you have to go a little bit into the DNA using the STR method or finding out. But this one will simply give you and say, okay, it's the virus. So then they say that is COVID. And then they extort lots of money. People's titles were taken. So the whole idea of counterfeit and piracy is a question of great urgency for this country.
Urgency. But let's talk about the urgency, about these literal ones.
Yes.
40 publications.
Yes.
I don't know how many man hours will be producing this.
Excellent question.
The ideation, the expression that you put it down in a fixed form. This is copyright that is protected.
Right.
And yet, we also have counterfeiting in terms of copyright infringement.
Absolutely.
As an author, as a publisher, how are you protecting your works?
Let me begin by saying this. One of the challenges I got through some time ago when I was writing the book, Cyber Law, we have research teams under the sui generis team. One of the challenges I got was when we sent out as research people to do, collecting information and data. Some of the students whom we use from almost every university in this country, some of the best, some of them graduate summa cum laude, others magna cum laude, came up and they brought information to me. But this information was actually got from their classroom notes. I did not know that they were coming from classroom notes. So one of the
classroom notes.
Classroom notes, yes. And then when I posted them, because one of my checks and balances for this is throw them up in the media, so that people can easily pick out and say, by the way, this has a problem. And we do that. We have corrected many mistakes by people coming up and pointing out, fingers on certain typos and stuff like that, And one of the guys said, listen, you have actually plagiarized my information. That was my information. I said, oh, goodness me, is that right?
But the students,
yes,
researchers gave it to you.
Absolutely, I'm coming. And then I said, okay, let me have the courtesy of sending you the entire book. Please pick out that particular area that belongs to you. So she picked out about 20 pages and threw it back to me. So I asked the student, I said, where did you get information from? He said, this information comes from this book. I'm aware that very lecturer who lectured with me got that information from this particular book. So
what was the credit given?
That's the question. So the question is whether would I acknowledge her as saying now, so and so, Mr. Muwema, I acknowledge that I've used your classroom notes, or I acknowledge Broadbaston where we all got the information from. I'm sure you're a Christian or a good Bible reader. You know the Gospel of Mark, Luke, and James. All of them, there's an argument that they all probably got from the same source because there is a correlation. I did some theology. A correlation in terms of the information that kind of resonates in the same way. So plagiarism, on the other hand, would mean carrying on something that rightly belongs to Mr. Muwema and I call it as if it was mine, right? And that is definitely right. No one in intellectual property, no academician would like to carry over people's information and pass it over there.
So you protect you. You have like a special, somebody can't copy.
That's a good question. One of the things that we did, even when we began sui generis law up, which one and award we talked about awards, I didn't want to go there. I wanted to be like Dr. King. Dr. King, Martin Luther King said one time, I don't want to be remembered by the many accolades that I've won. but I want to be remembered for having sounded the drum of justice. So if there's anything that I want to be remembered, it's not because of so many accolades that I've won, but how I've been able to influence my brother and sister in terms of information. Every book you see here is readily available on Amazon, on Scribd, on Digital Draft, on all repositories. Makerere University repository, Nkumba repository, UCU repository, KIU repository, IUI repository, UMI repository. Go to Congress, University of Congress, all of those, we give them out free. Even the sui generis law app that was, by the way, helped, because I engaged incredible students. One of them is right over there. We sit with them and engage with them and we debate. And most of these ideas come out of what they call Eureka moments. We are sitting here and an idea just drops. Yesterday I was coming and I said, wait a minute, why don't I talk about things to do with suing America? Do we know why? Because I saw recently via WhatsApp where they were saying that now they wanted they had stopped the speaker from actually going to America because he had presided over something to do with the anti-homosexuality, which, by the way, we have a book already called Strict Methodology. I've written about homosexuality even before it came into debate, and even gave them, when I was before Parliament, everything I spoke, I looked at the petition that is propounded by the professors. Everything I spoke about, all the backfires I spoke about, is in that book, and I've already made it public, information. But to answer your question straight in terms of how do you protect, like I said, the best way to protect, obviously, is to put the word copyright, as you already know. But that is not substantive in any way, because our students, for example, most of these things are probably academic and intellectual, would like to rely on them. How are you gonna? That book called Objection, My Lord. You see that is called Objection, My Lord. That book, to publish only that book, one copy costs you 1.5 million shillings, without me getting any time. But I've given all universities that copy free of charge. Now what we do, we give them on repositories for purposes of people to access them free of charge. So all these books are really available at Lubogo.com and suigenesis.com.
So Isaac, you must be very rich, because if you're spending 1.5 million on average to do this publication and you've done over 40, you are basically donating knowledge, you are contributing to the stock of knowledge and understanding. This is how I should take it. You are a philanthropist.
That's a good point. A wise man one time said that what is the value of money except if it is shared among his men? I come from that theology that believes that it's more blessed to give than to receive. When I give and help my brother muwema, I can assure you it will be given back to me, a good measure, shaken, pressed, and run over.
Wow, that's the best. But now the counterfeit like to take for free, manipulate, tweak it, make it to pass off like Chris Lubogo's one.
Absolutely. And
do you think that we have a big problem in the academia where you are? Do you see a lot of this copyright infringement?
Absolutely. Let me tell you in black and white. Even now when you go to law school, name any law school now. I have some professors whose names are not mentioned because I haven't got their consent, whose books are readily being photocopied in one of those jurisdictions, different jurisdictions. And yet, little have these guys got. By the way, if you want to be not so rich, with the exception of the few, go into writing, especially as an African. But if you want to make money,
because they will just rip you off.
Absolutely. That was told me by Professor Dr. Bagala, who I'm sure you know, was teaching law. He's now in the US. One time he was adjudicating a matter before a judicial officer, and the judicial officer advised and said, why don't you go into academia? Because I see you're going to waste your time with this litigation. Litigation, these days they used to say a good lawyer is the one who knows where to find the law. Not so. Now they say the good lawyer is the one who takes the judge for lunch. So that kind of ideology, the kind of thinking has changed.
So you're saying that even in our education circles, and we're going in the next episode to talk about something which has been trending, the expired degrees, but you are saying as a precursor that even in our education sector, the counterfeit subculture is well underlined.
If there is a better
so
way,
exam leakages, getting degrees without attending class,
absolutely,
not doing the exams and all this, you are saying it is present.
Everything about lack of indigenous original show thought is in itself a counterfeit. And we will go there, like you rightly said. National Council, call whatever it is, even by the virtue of the degrees and the curriculum review, everything that I'm going to point here is not being taught traditionally in law school. And yet, it's the future of tomorrow. So, the point that you're raising in terms of a challenge that the nation has in terms of intellectual counterfeit, call it what you want, is a real and visible one. And the only way we can fight that is, first of all, is to have ethics, to, first of all, to give credit where it is due, which is also scripture, but also be able to comprehend and enhance and protect people in terms of this copyright. I have a book on music and the law, where people are struggling in terms of producing, protecting their rights. Those musicians of yours, the blah blah blah, the John Blacks of the right, produce songs today, and the next morning you see it in Hoima or in wherever. How are they going to rip off their sweat? These are things that we don't
come from their creation.
Absolutely.
But as we close this,
yes.
I think even you, the scholars, you have a share, fair share of blame in propagating or creating or providing a conducive environment for this literal counterfeiting, this copyright infringement. Because some of the scholars, some of the lecturers have been involved in situations where they actually encourage. Okay, if you look at sex for exams, campaign, leaking of exams, and so on. The students are to blame, the lecturers are to blame, the university is to blame. You're now defending, you're in the dock defending the teachers, the lecturers, the principals. What do you say to this?
It's an unfortunate event that if a nation stoops that low, then we have no legacy at all to protect in terms of continuity. So I clearly understand you, senior counsel, when you come from that premise, and put all those, rightly said accusation in terms of intellectualism in universities and how low we have gone. I'll give you an example of the remunerations perhaps that caused that in terms of the feedbacks that people are supposed to get, the lecturers that you're saying. A senior lecturer in law is actually earning, in private universities, is actually earning less than the teacher of arts in secondary school. In spite of the fact that teachers of arts are actually asking for an increment in terms of their salary. Think about that. So how would you expect this guy, who is professing to be a senior lecturer in law, to survive at the end of the day? You understand? And then it has to be reflected in terms of publishing a book. History of Busoga, this book, just to produce one copy, one manuscript that has to be, cost me about 1.5 million shillings. Just this. Then producing 100 copies cost me 8 million shillings. Just 8 copies. Think about that. Now, how are you going to write and propagate this information and give it when you're earning meager resources? When government doesn't even have substantive research institutes. The only research institute that we have in Uganda, I think, like CRB, the one that is owned by Professor Mamdan, and then the Hurricane, the one that's now owned, I think,
very limited.
Limited, absolutely. Limited. The one that is the Professor Oluka and the Dr. Zahara and the Dr. Kamumba, and then the one that is the one that Professor Mbazira, Pilak, and then the one that is almost collapsed, the one that.
So as we end this,
yes.
Basically you are saying, you're going back to the very thing that you have been saying. For the common man on the street, survival, counterfeits, providing a good prospect and a lure to go in. You're saying also in education, it's again survival, the economics and sociology of everything is affecting this. But we need to take a break and come back into the big subject of the expiry. Let's take a break.